Hi, welcome to today's Greedy 3D. We're going to have a little soiree into the DC universe today, and I'm going to be making this. This is the Sanix Batman. I'll show you how I put it all together, and I'll show you how I painted it. And if you like what you see and you like all things 3D printing and painting, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel. We've got 650 subscribers now. It's building nicely. So thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed. If you haven't subscribed yet, really would be appreciated if you could just hit that subscribe button. So stay tuned for the making and the painting of Batman. Now the first thing I'm going to do is put the three parts of the cape together, and I'm going to use some super glue, and I'm also going to use some resin welding. Now if you've never done this before, all you need to do is take some of the resin you've used to make the model, an ultraviolet light and a little brush. Just brush it across the gap and use the ultraviolet light to set it. What this does is it allows the glue to set well and the resin holds it in place. And what you can also do with resin welding is fill some of the gaps in between your resin that you can clearly see there with the resin you've used to make the thing in the first place. And you just brush it on quite literally and use the ultraviolet light to cure it. Now you're still going to need to do some post work on it. You're going to need to do some sanding and some finishing and some prep work, but it's a great way to put it together. Now make sure you wear your gloves. Yes, I know I didn't wear them this time, so make sure you wear your gloves, and use resin welding to put your big pieces together nicely. Second thing I did was just made the base, and this went together really well. There's 5 parts to the base. It glues together really easily, and it glues together in the places that you would expect the paving stones to be, so you don't really need to do any filling with this stage, so that didn't take too long at all. Over to the airbrush now, and I'm starting with just some matte black Army Painter primer to hit the gloves, the boots, and also the cowl. I find that this is the final colour. Some of Batman is going to be black, so not only am I giving him an undercoat, but I am also giving him his final colour. I've moved on to a little bit of demonic yellow to do his utility belt, and I've given that a little bit of a blast all across, as you can see. It's a great contrast to the black and grey of Batman, the utility belt, so I wanted something really prime to stand out. And once I've done that, over to some uniform grey for the rest of him, and I'm going to do the body. It's almost the same colour as the resin, just a little bit different, but it's definitely going to need a good coat of this. And I'm going to do his legs, and that's the airbrush work pretty much done on Batman. That didn't take too long at all. Now I'm going to use some Barbarian flesh, some Army Painter paint here to do the face. Now you know I like to airbrush my faces. Well, it's just not practical on a model of this size with the majority of his face being black. So I'm just going to brush this on using a nice flat brush. It's going to take a few layers, of course it is, but that's fine, you know. We can do this with a brush quite easily. The Army Painter paints are really versatile, and the Barbarian flesh is a really good base layer of flesh to put on there. I'm going to do his bat now on the middle of his chest, and I'm just going to use some matte black for that. And the uniform is a really easy thing to paint. Batman is not a hard one to paint. There's not too much going on, which makes him an easy one, especially if you're beginning or you're just starting out. And all you need to do really is just follow the outline of the bat, put some matte black on there, and go around the outer edges as well. Don't just do the front of it. Now, getting some strong tone. This is an Army Painter wash. What I'm going to do for the uniform, because there's not much to it really, all the little braids that you see on the front and the back, I'm going to take this wash and I'm just going to highlight them up. Now this will do a couple of things. One, it will give a little bit of something for the eye to look at on Batman and take away from the plainness. And two, the washes are really good to show some definition and to show a little bit of shadowing. So the other thing I'm going to do, not just give it to his braiding, I'm going to also just give it to his tummy muscles, to his six-pack. So I'm going to go around them as well. And again, this will just add something for the eye to look at and take away from the monotony of the single paint, if you like. And I've done exactly the same thing for his trousers there. There's quite a few bits of braid on there as well, and I've gone down his bottom and just any little ridges or folds in his uniform as well. And the washes, again from armypainter, and you can get them in my description. I am an Amazon affiliate and you can buy them from there, and a bit will come back to the channel. The paints are brilliant. I'm using exactly the same wash here, just on his utility belt, and I'm just going to dirty it up a bit. It looks far too clean and yellow, so let's just dirty that up a bit with the washes. And all I'm doing is I'm putting it into the shadowed areas. I'm painting it across the front, and that wash will fall into the background, into the depths of the model, and it'll go darker on the inside and lighter on the outside, and that's all I want it to do really. Now to his face, he's having another layer of barbarian flesh. He had about 3 to 4 layers of this really, and I just built it up slowly and carefully, making sure I go into the eyes as well. Using some silver paint now on a nice big brush, I'm just going to dry brush some details onto his boots. Again, this is quite a small model really, so I want some of the parts to stick out a little bit, and by doing some dry brushing techniques, and if you've never done dry brushing, it really is a brilliant way of bringing out detail. Just get some paint on your brush, get most of it off on a kitchen towel, and then lightly brush across the areas you want to highlight. And as you can see on his boots here, that really does add to an effect of shadowing on there. I'm doing the other boot here now, exactly the same thing again, and I'm an advocate of dry brushing. Filling in darker areas with the washes and lighter areas with dry brushing really does bring your model to life. And exactly the same with the hands, on these the claw bits on the sides of his hand, and also just across them, just to give them a little bit of a look of reflection. While I've got my dry brush in hand, I'm just going to dry brush his bat and give a little bit of definition to his uniform really, and just make that a little bit more interesting. Now while we're talking dry brushing, I'm going to take some of this, it's just some grey primer, just some basic grey primer, and again it's armypainter, on a dry brush, and I'm just going to give that highlighted colour to his uniform, on his shoulders, on his arms, on his back, on his six-pack, on his bits of his body that stick out really, just to show the effect or the illusion of light. Now I normally use some quite big brushes for dry brushing, and you can see the ones I normally use here, but I can also use these quite flat ones. They're just as good as well, and don't forget this is quite a small model, so you really don't need a huge dry brush, and I will be using some bigger dry brushes later, but these little brushes will do exactly the same job. Now back to his face, and you can see there that the barbarian flesh is really doing its job lovely, but I am just going to give him one more coat, and I'm going to concentrate on the darker areas in the recesses of his nasolabial folds and under his jaw, etc. But I am going to come back to those areas in a little while. I'm going to paint the whites of his eyes white. Now this is a delicate thing to do on a model of this size, but I really do think it's important to do it, and while I've got the white in hand, I'm just going to give his teeth a little bit of a going over too. Again, at this scale, white teeth is absolutely fine. Larger models, you probably need to downtone them just a little bit. Now for the lips, I've mixed a little bit of red with a little bit of the skin tone, and I'm just going to gently go across the lips on the bottom and the top. Again, at this scale, it's all you need to do. You don't need to overdo it on the lips. The bigger the model, the more detail you need to put in, but on something of this really tiny scale, and you can see his head's about the size of my thumb, you can get away with that nicely. While I've got that pink in hand, I'm just going to paint a really thin pink line at the bottom of his eye, just as a natural eye would look. And taking the same brush, a really narrow brush, and some black, I'm just drawing in the black of his irises, and I'm going to make sure that I get these nice and level so he's looking in the same direction. And I'm using that black as well just to tidy up around the cowl to make his eyes look as good as I can. I am going to paint his irises brown, and I'm going to drop a dot in for his pupil. Again, at this stage, at this size, it's really hard to get eyes to look really good because it's such a small model. You probably could just get away with a black iris, but I do like to do as much as I can because, you know, that's what it's all about, really trying to do the best that you can. Okay, so I'm using a flesh wash now from armypainter just to paint into the lines of his face. And again, you'll see shadows, natural shadows in faces. They're not just one colour. And the flesh wash is really good for this. So I'm going to do his nasolabial folds, underneath his lip, and any area that shows a dimple in the skin, and under his eyes as well. Now his face is done, I'm going to start to assemble him, and I'm just using some glue here, some super glue, and you can use anything that you've got to hand. I find the Loctite one is really good, and on he goes, and there we go. His head is joined his body, and he's looking very Batman-esque. Same again for the arms, one after the other. The good thing with this Loctite super glue is it really does stick really quickly. Now I've just ordered an activator, which I've never used before, so I'm going to be using that in some videos moving forward just to see what the difference is with that. But I find this glue sets relatively quickly anyway. On with his utility belt, and then on with the lower part of his body, and we're going to pretty much call Batman put together and done. A few bits left to do with him, of course. Just moving on to the base now, and I'm using that grey, that uniform grey, to just highlight the base, using that big brush that I mentioned earlier, and just going over it. Now you can see straight away that gives it that paving stone look. And moving on to this orange, I'm going to just paint them directly onto they're like rails or railings, and I want to give it a rust effect. So I'm going to put it on, and I'm going to build the layers of that yellow one. I'm also going to add some browns and some lighter orange as well. This is just a base tone wash, a strong tone that I'm splodging on there, and I'm going to use my favourite big armypainter brush, and I'm just going to move it into the gaps. This, you can see straight away, just adds another layer to the pavement, a darker inner layer in the gaps that would normally be sitting there, and along with that dry brushing makes the base just come to life really. Using an old dish sponge, really, these are great for applying your rust techniques, and I'm just using that lava orange on the base colour, a really dark orange, and I'm just going to push it across, and that just makes it just speckles it, and it adds it in, and it keeps away any uniform pattern. And I think you'll agree that on a dark orange, that lighter orange with a little bit of brown as well, can give you a rust colour. There's plenty of tutorial videos on the internet to show you how to do rust. Okay, I'm going to glue that together now. This is the bat signal going together, and obviously it'll be standing out in the rain, so it would get a little bit rusty, and I'm quite happy with how all that's come together. And I'm just going to use a really narrow brush with some bright orange, and I'm going to touch some of the nuts and bolts, and I'm going to make it look like the rust is running down, as if it's got wet with rain and it's running down in the direction of the ground. Using a dry brushing technique with some silver, again, I'm going to just add some more silver to this. When you're using a rust technique, if you add oranges and browns and silvers, and if you need to add a paint colour as well, all these things will add to the effect. As I say, there's plenty of videos out there on how to do rust, so I suggest you just take a couple of minutes just to have a look at one of those, and then, you know, find one that works for you and follow it. This is a sort of a Gatling gun of some kind. This is a Batman vs Iron Man diorama. I'm not doing Iron Man, but this is shooting some kind of Gatling thing at him. So I'm just going to dry brush that with some silver, and as you can see, the dry brushing on top of black and silver makes a really good metallic effect. And once I'm happy that I've got enough of the silver covered, I'm just going to go onto a bronze paint, and I'm just going to touch up a couple of areas on there just to give it a little bit of interest. And once that's done, I'm going to stick that to the base, and there we go. That was relatively easy to do the base, wasn't it? It wasn't too difficult at all. I've still got to put the white circle in with the black bat, which I didn't catch on video, into the bat signal. And the cape now, this is the cape that I put together with resin welding, and I've cleaned it all up, and I am just going to give it a dry brush of some silver, and once that's done, Batman is finished.